I'm Barry Bluestone. I'm the Dean of the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs here at Northeastern and Director of the Dukakis Center, Kitty and Michael Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy. And I want to welcome all of you. It's wonderful to see some old friends and see so many new people joining us here. In a minute, I'll also introduce our co-instructor for this class, Paul Grogan, who's with us. But I want to go through and tell you a little bit about what we're going to be doing in this open classroom between now and December 10th, every Thursday evening in this room, with the exception, of course, of Thanksgiving. This is actually the fourth open classroom that we've sponsored, one each semester. The very first one was on this same topic back in the spring of 2008. And we inaugurated that program, and I think Paul and I had something like sometimes 40 or 50 people who showed up for that. In the following semester, we had, in the fall semester of 2008, in the middle of the presidential election, we had the open classroom dedicated to the subject of policy advice to the next president. And of course, when we began that last year in September, a year ago this week, we didn't know who that president would be. We now know. And that was an incredibly exciting course, which was co-taught by our Professor Michael Dukakis, former governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and Bob Culver, who's the president of Mass Development, the large quasi-public development group. And then last semester, this past spring, Kathy Minahan, the former president and CEO of the Boston Federal Reserve Bank, and I taught a course called Economic Growth with Equity. And we dealt with a lot of questions around, of course, how do you remain prosperous, and how do you assure or try and find ways of making that prosperity more widely distributed. But what we're going to be doing this fall is getting back to an issue that Paul and I are most excited about, the 21st century city. The metro areas where we live and where 80% of Americans live today. And what we're going to be doing is go through, over the next few weeks, some kind of basics, starting tonight, about how academics take a look at cities. What are the issues we look at? What are the key issues in urban sociology, urban public policy, and urban political science, urban economics? How do we academics look at cities, which may not be exactly the same way you think about it every day? And we're going to continue by looking at some of those issues by, in the next 2 weeks after today, taking a look at, on the 17th and the 24th, at issues of concepts of urban growth. What are some of the tools we use to understand how cities grow? And we're going to use the lens of history to do that. We're going to be taking a look using a book that is available to you if you wish. And we're not encouraging you to do this, but if you wish, you can purchase this book, The Urban Experience, which I happen to be one of the co-authors, an interdisciplinary book which we wrote because those of us who were teaching urban here didn't find a book that we liked. And therefore we decided to write one we did. And this is a book we're going to be using quite a bit this semester. What I have done, and again, you are under no obligation at all to purchase this. It's normally a $90 book because textbooks are very expensive, but I was able to coax our publisher, Oxford University Press, to allow me to buy almost unlimited number at my author's discount. So I don't get any royalties on that, but for $56 rather than $90, you can purchase this if you wish. But you can also purchase it from Amazon or barnesandnoble.com or from Oxford directly. But we'll be using several chapters in that book, and we're also next week going to introduce you to a CD that comes with that book. It actually is a CD not about the book, but it has census information from 1970 to 2005 on every town and city in the United States, in every state. All 351 towns and cities in Massachusetts, more than 2,000 in Pennsylvania, and it's data that goes back to 1970. So we're going to be looking at a lot of data this semester for about 20 cities that we're going to follow. But if you happen to have been born in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, or grew up there, and you want to see how does Wilkes-Barre look compared with Detroit, or Boston, or San Francisco, you'd be able to look at that. It's a very powerful resource that we were happy to include with this book. But as I said, next week and the week after, the three two authors of this book are going to introduce you to urban studies through the lens of history, looking at the growth of cities in the 19th century, the great immigration that occurred during that period of time. We're going to be looking at it in the 20th century, and then, of course, introducing the 21st century. In October 1st, we're going to start taking a look at guests we're going to invite here, and bring them here and taking a look at a range of issues. And what I'm most excited about is that we're going to begin with something far afield from my own discipline, the dismal science of economics, by looking at the question of what do we mean by community. After all, urban centers are communities. And we have two wonderful people joining us for that. James Carroll, who many of you read in the Boston Globe, a Catholic theologian, and Barry Schrage, a Jewish theologian from the from the Combined Jewish Philanthropies, who will be talking about what does community mean, and particularly what does urban community mean. We're going to be looking about how does a city foster a spirit of community. We're going to look at what stresses undermine community. We're going to look at neighborhood cohesion. We're going to look at segregation. We're going to look at integration. In the following week, we're going to reprise a wonderful debate that we had in the first year on the whole question of urban transportation and mass transit. And with us will be Stephanie Pollack, who's the Associate Director of the Dukakis Center, and David Luberoff, who's the Executive Director of the Rappaport Institute for Greater Boston at the Kennedy School at Harvard University. I must tell you that when we last had the two of them together, there were fireworks. And it was one of the most exciting evenings that we had over the whole question of, for example, does it make sense to have commuter rail? We'll also have Fred Salvucci joining us, former Secretary of Transportation, and many would say the godfather of the Big Dig. Following that, on October 15th, we're going to take a look at an issue dear to my heart, urban housing markets. We're going to do it a couple weeks before we release the 2009 annual Greater Boston Housing Report Card, and we're going to be having with us the former Secretary for Economic Development in the Commonwealth, Doug Foy, as well as Bonnie Udorfer, who is an expert on housing policy. And we're going to be looking at the supply and demand for housing, housing prices. We're going to be looking at new housing policies for economic development, urban sprawl, a whole bunch of neat issues there. Plus, I'll probably give you a sneak preview with Paul's, if Paul will allow me, of some of the information that we're going to be releasing at the Boston Foundation, I think on October 28th, when we release this year's housing report card. Although we'll leave the best parts for the 28th. I won't steal my own thunder. The following week, we have a wonderful program developed to the whole question of urban economic development. Commonwealth of Massachusetts today has about 200,000 fewer jobs than it had in December of '03. We have seen communities struggling to be able to rebuild their economic base, to bring investment in, to create jobs. Well, how do you do that? Well, we're going to have three people to join us. Bob Culver, the CEO of Mass Development, Deshpande, thought a lot about economic development, and our own Tim Ferguson, who is here tonight, who is one of the chief partners of Next Street Financial, a company here headquartered in Dudley Square, developing and bringing back to America real merchant banking. Then we're going to turn our attention from economic development to education. We're going to be looking at public policies to create competitive advantage in a city. We're going to look at the role of technology in entrepreneurship. And we have, among other people, we still have several people who have been invited. We hope they'll be with us, but Michael Goldstein, who is the essentially the principal of the Match Charter School. Fascinating, fascinating school that I've been spending some time with. Then in November, we're going to turn to the whole question of urban safety and neighborhood security. And joining us that evening will be Ed Davis, Police Commissioner for the City of Boston. Ed will be joining us for the second time. He was with us last year when we did this, and one of the most fascinating, almost mesmerizing talks I've ever heard about how you rise from being a narc in Lowell to being the police commissioner in the City of Boston, and the issues he faces, particularly around keeping neighborhoods safe. We'll also have Robert Lewis Jr., who's the Vice President of the Boston Foundation, and a fascinating fellow who will tell us tales of the inner city, and particularly having grown up and been in high school during the school busing crisis in the 1970s. We're going to follow that by looking at an issue that is very important now, much more important than it was in spring of 2008. That's urban public finance. How do we fund all this stuff? And we're going to have with us Jay Ash, the city manager of the city of Chelsea, who's a fascinating fellow, and Michael Widner from the Mass Taxpayers Foundation to explain to us kind of the fiscal problems we face and how we might deal with those. And then on the 19th, we're tackling another critical issue, and that is working with public employee unions. Over the last few years, we've seen all kinds of issues in the newspaper about firefighters and police officers and teachers and charter schools and pensions. And we're going to have with us that night Rob McCursey, an industrial relations expert from the Sloan School at MIT, Tom Glosnell, who is the president of the Massachusetts American Federation of Teachers, and Scott Lang. Scott is now the mayor of New Bedford and has had to deal with the public employee unions in his town as mayor after a career of 31 years as a pro-union attorney. Fascinating evening. And then Thanksgiving, followed by what may be, again, one of the great nights here. We're going to look at the plight of the city newspaper and how important newspapers are to the prosperity and culture of a city. And with us are really, truly another amazing group of people. Renee Loth, who just retired as editor of the editorial page of the Boston Globe. Danny Okrent, who was the first ombudsman of the New York Times and former assistant editor of Time magazine. Adrian Walker, a columnist for the Boston Globe. And Robert Kuttner, who is the editor, co-editor of American Prospect, and has for a long time dealt with issues of the role of media and public policy. And finally, on the last night of class, December 10th, we're going to take a look at the whole question of urban leadership and civic engagement, the role of anchor institutions. And we have joining us Paul Guzzi, president of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, and Joseph Aoun, the president of Northeastern University, and we expect that Mayor Tom Menino will be joining us as well that evening. It is quite a trip. We're going to be taking a look at many of the facets of urban life in ways that you may have thought of, since most of you live in the city or near one. But we're going to be taking a look at it through the lens of academics, through the lens of journalists, through the lens of public policy makers, through the lens of transportation experts, you name it. For those of you who have not been to an open classroom before, we run about 2 hours. The first hour is devoted to our guest speakers. We take a short break so you can stretch your legs. And then we come back and we devote the last 45 minutes or 50 minutes to your questions and answers. And we hope to finish up each evening by sometime around 8, 8:05 or so. So that is what we're going to be doing. I hope those of you who came here because you thought this was a lecture on DNA or RNA or some other issue, you're in the wrong classroom. But if you're interested in cities, you've probably found the right place. What I want to do now is introduce the co-instructor, the co-professor for this course, a very dear friend of mine, Paul Grogan. Paul and I have worked together for years. Paul is president of the Boston Foundation, and in my estimation, and one of the reasons why I'm so excited that he's joined us in this class, is that he has, under his leadership at the Boston Foundation, transformed the Boston Foundation into one of the most proactive community groups, not only in Boston, but in the nation. The Boston Foundation is not only providing funds to all kinds of community groups, as well as some research, but it is more important than that, I think. It's often set the agenda for many of the key issues around education reform, around public finance, around housing. It publishes the Boston Indicators, which is an invaluable resource that we will also be using in this class. Paul is one of those people who thinks about cities day and night. He may give you a little bit of his history of all the work he did before he became the president of the Boston Foundation, particularly working with Mayor Kevin White early in his career. But somebody who has a passion about cities and has devoted himself to the city of Boston, probably more than almost anybody else I know. Paul Grogan.
live up to that introduction, Barry. Thank you very, very much. I'm delighted to see all of you here this evening, and delighted to have been invited back again to be part of this enterprise. I do want to emphasize that I am not like Professor Bluestone, a real professor or a scholar, and I'll try to not pretend to be. I did write a book too, though, and in contrast to Barry's, you can get mine for about $11. So, so I don't know how to commend it to you. Seriously, I am delighted to be here. One of the things we wanted to do with this course, as Barry said, is view the material, the issues from a variety of perspectives, put a whole bunch of different lenses on the camera, and including, you know, the scholarly lens, the data, the scholarly perspective that Barry will be and some colleagues will be supplying at every turn. In my case, I've been fortunate not only to be involved with cities in one way or another for virtually my entire career, but to have a series of different vantage points through that period. I began as a very junior assistant to the legendary Kevin White, four-term mayor of Boston, who was first elected at the age of 37 in the late 60s and served into the early 80s, a remarkable leader who I worked for 8 years, and then had an opportunity to stay on in city government for several years with his successor, also a terrific mayor, but in some very different ways, Mayor Ray Flynn. I then had an opportunity to go to New York and run a national nonprofit intermediary that was raising and placing private capital in neighborhood revitalization efforts all over the country. The name of this organization is